And we are currently live, so take it away, Ann Marie and Julie.
All right. Welcome to Book Chat with Pratt. I am Ann Marie Harvey, and here today with me is
Julie Johnson from the Roland Park Branch.
And we are members of the Caribbean Lit Book Club. I have to say that 2020 was a very difficult year and a very different year for all of us. And sitting at home, not knowing what's coming next, what's happening, how to stay connected to other people. We're like, okay, can I do a book club? And I'm like, okay, what do we want to focus on? Or what would I like to focus on? And I started seeing a lot of like Caribbean literature being published in 2020. And, I'm like, okay, well, I can't host the authors like I usually do, but maybe we can do something online and continue to read literature about the Caribbean. And so I set out and I sent out an email and I begged, I reminded, and here we are. We are, what Julie, I think 15 months in?
I think so.
So we started in May of 2020. And, we just decided that we kind of like each other a little bit. And we stuck around with each other. And it's been a fun, supportive, and quite, it's almost like reaffirming time for all of us. So before we jump into the type of books that we've read, I just want to say that we are open to new members. We meet every third Wednesdays. Every third Wednesday.
Fourth.
It's the fourth. Remember, we shifted up because we were once Thursday. So now we go, we meet every fourth Wednesday at 6:30 via Zoom. And even with us returning back to some in-person programming, we will remain virtual because that has allowed a lot of our members to participate from all over the state of Maryland and sometimes outside of the state, outside of the country. So we welcome new members. Let's see. We can get ready to start the show, the slideshow. So as I said, 2020 was a very different year for us. And so we started off by thinking about what we wanted to read. The first book we read, Frying Plantain by Zalika Reed-Benta. Now, in the Caribbean, and especially in Jamaica, we say frying plantains. So we had our own debates about frying plantains and not plantains.
Right.
Right. So, Julie, do you want to tell us anything about this particular book?
Yeah. So this one was the first one. When we get to the one that Ann Marie hoodwinked me into the group with, I'll talk about that one too. But this is the first one that we read as a group, and it is one of several that are collections of short stories. And in this particular case, we're following the same protagonist as she ages through all of these stories. Some of the others are just more general short story collections, but this one you actually follow the same protagonist all the way through. And I believe is she in Canada, Ann Marie?
She's in Canada in a place called Little Jamaica.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And she starts as a child. We get her all the way up to a young adult.
Yeah.
And some of it is fairly predictable, growing up kinds of things, squabbling with her mother and so on and so forth. But there's also an undercurrent of a second generation immigrant and the first generation's expectations of her and her expectations of her family.
Mm-hmm.
This is the one, right, where Dad takes her for a visit to the other woman's house at
Her
some point.
grandfather did.
Grandfather did.
Right, right. So in this one,
Right.
the interesting thing is that um, um, Kara is living with her mother and grandmother at one point. It was quite an interesting story, and just basically watching like the marriage between the grandma and the grandpa, and the dynamics of a man who loves the road.
And then the various stops along the road as he goes.
There you go.
Yeah.
And he doesn't mind taking the little one with him.
Right. Absolutely no secrecy on that one. She may have been outside, but she certainly was not a secret.
Yeah. And, one of the things that it's interesting about the books, we have members who, Sherry grew up in Nova Scotia. So she was able to relate to like some of what was happening in the book. And so it's always a good thing when members are able to relate to the book and be like, yeah, I know we did this, we did that, growing up, and where to find the foods in different community, and why is it called Little Jamaica in Canada?
Right.
So
right.
It's always good when members can like tie into what's happening with the characters in the book. All right. So the next book that we talked about, How to Love a Jamaican by Alexia Authors. And the interesting thing about How to Love a Jamaican is that we had Alexia visit us in, I think, 2018, I believe is when the book came out. Mm-hmm. And so she was, she visited, and we were able to, talk to her and interact with her. And we were able to relate to, like, I think there are over 6 stories in the book. Mm-hmm. They're not all related. There are some themes that are quite compelling. I mean, quite different in how she approached, like, telling the stories about colorism, classism,
and going to school in Iowa when you're from Jamaica.
Yeah, that too.
I was right there with that poor girl, because
and I
never been to Iowa either.
Yeah, because she also brought up issues of mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens as like immigrant, you're like trying to find your way, because the first story about Kelly Rowland and light skinned girls, and
right.
and so the colorism and what happens when your immigrant parent totally disassociates themselves from your culture. And then the other immigrant family, you're eating rice and peas, plantains, you're eating everything that they would have had in the islands. But here, some families are like, oh no, you won't speak patois, or you won't speak Creole, you won't speak a certain language, because, you're in a different class now. So, that was interesting with one of those stories that we read. I remember being introduced to this book because of the what was the essay, Bad Behavior. That was my first introduction to Alexia Authors, when the young girl was sent home misbehaved in school. And, in the Caribbean, if you know anything about being sent back home, sometimes it's a punishment, sometimes it's a blessing. So that was quite an interesting story. So I think there's a little bit of everything in the novel. I don't think you have to be Jamaican, and people always laugh at the title. So again, here's another title that makes you kind of smile, or frying plantains, and How to Love a Jamaican. It makes you smile thinking about what is in this book.
Right.
Okay. Right. So do you have anything else to say about that one, or do we go to the next slide?
I think we're ready to go next.
Next slide. Okay. So
Hurricane of the Heart is by a local author. Jewel Amethyst. She joins us with some regularity at our book club. So we felt it only appropriate to read one of her books. As you can guess from the cover, this is an old-fashioned, straightforward romance. The young woman is a wedding planner. The young man is a gadabout who's in town just long enough to be the best man at a friend's wedding, when, of course, a hurricane hits and off we go. The nice thing about this one is that Jewel, of course, also talks about some of the economics, some of the social classes within, what country are we in? I feel bad. Dominica.
We are in Dominica. Yes.
In Dominica. And how the hurricane hits different parts of the country in different ways. All, of course, however, leading up to a romance, and it's happily ever after ending. This one was really nice to have something different. But the depiction of the hurricane in the middle, I've never been through one that was more than just anything we got here in Baltimore. And the hurricane in this title is much more than anything we've gotten in Baltimore. And, you know, she talks about having to hunker down and hiding under this and climbing out over that. And where did the roof go? And where did the palm trees go? And where did our water go? You know, where did we get our potable water from? So she brings up more than just the romance, but.
And you know, the name slips me, but she also mentioned the indigenous population that still lives in Dominica, and like the treatment and just maybe living on the outskirts a little bit of the society, even though they've been there. And so that was an interesting piece of it. And just having Jewel in the group, when we have authors, and we're so fortunate to have local authors to join us, quite a few of them, you know, have joined us over the last 15 months. And so we enjoy interacting with them. I hope they enjoy interacting with us. I mean, it's like, we don't hold back. If we didn't like it, we did not like it. You know, so that was a big part of Hurricane of the Heart. So it was trying to like break up some of the harshness that some people, or the heaviness that some of our members were like, well, you know, I'd love for us to be able to read about love, you know. So that's what
we have a couple dyed-in-the-wool romance readers in the group, and we do. We got to toss them a bone every now and then.
We do. All right. And the next local author is Katia Ulis, and she is one of the Caribbean authors who usually would come to an in-person book signing and talk. She's from Haiti, and we loved Mouths Don't Speak. It wasn't a long novel, and we were able to like relate to Jacqueline and the story of the earthquake in Haiti from 2010. And just what it means to, like, you know, be a family of wealth in Haiti. And, you know, the other families who were impacted with the hurricane, those who could stay and those who could leave. And also the story, also the story of Jacqueline's and her being away from her home because she attended boarding school, right?
Right. The story starts in Baltimore.
Right.
She sets it initially here in Baltimore. But yeah, Jacqueline was sent away from home, as many wealthy children are, to a boarding school when she was a child. And when that earthquake hits and devastates Haiti, she of course panics, trying to reach her parents over and over again, and initially assumes that her parents must not have survived it. And when she, in fact, does discover that they've survived, recriminations about why didn't you get in touch? Why didn't you answer? What's going on? Are there any other family members we need to check on? all come into play. And as Katya is so stressed out, as Jacqueline is so stressed, you also get the story of her husband, who is a U.S. Marine combat veteran suffering from his own form of PTSD. And having said all of that, and what sounds like it's going to be a depressing story, she does end on an upbeat note.
Yeah. Because we're all looking for a happy ending. and don't forget that with most Caribbean stories, there is a history, and part of it is definitely, you'll find that out once you start reading this novel. And so for that, we definitely appreciate having Katya in the group. Now on to the next slide. Okay. Do I need to say any more about this one? Because Julie just went.
This one was one of my favorites. It's probably one of the longest that we read. Lauren was able to join us. Ann Marie, she lives in Montgomery County.
She lives outside of Baltimore, yes. Ann Marie's brain is gone.
Right. But Lauren was able to join us for this and has come in once or twice into other discussions as well. This is one of the longest of the books that we've read. We have dutifully tried to keep things in the say 200 to 250 range. This one is longer than that. It is a historical novel set in about 1796 to about 1830, and through a series of backflashes and fill-in of the story, we are following the life of a free Black woman who was a member of a family that owned their land in whatever.
This is Trinidad. We're in Trinidad. We're with Rosa.
Okay, so they started out in Trinidad when it was still under Spanish rule.
Right.
And as the story progresses, it has become under British rule, and there's a real question about whether or not the freed people of color will be able to retain their lands under British rule. And that starts a whole immigration story. And you end up with Rosa in Montana as a member of the Crow Nation, with her child. With her child, and you get Mom's story in sort of flashback as her son starts to question what's going on and how did they land here and what is my family like. And other people are woven into this story as well. And by the time we got to the end, I was just amazed at the movement in the story. The folks in this story go from Trinidad to Montana. There's one character that starts out in the continental United States, ends up in Trinidad, and then ends up back in Montana. And, he's walking. And when he ain't walking, he's on a ship. The multiple storylines that Lauren pulled together, the issues of race and identity and history and what you do or you do not tell your children. And it just an astounding piece of literature. And I found it very accessible. I mean, she's got big ideas, but it's not some terribly difficult read either.
And I liked it because it's like anytime I can read a fiction book and there is like nonfiction involved, it always sends me, the librarian in me, to go research something else. And you could tell, and Lauren being in the, the discussion, just hearing about how she did her research, and you can clearly see that in the novel. Clearly, it's like, this is not, it's fiction, but you have to go back and check some facts, and there are historical facts. And so, I love a novel that can basically take you, to that place and time and almost you
Oh,
just get
yes.
lost in it. Now, this one I
Very
read,
much so.
right, because it wasn't on audio as yet, but now it is on audio. And one
Oh,
of my
wow.
favorite narrator, Robin Miles, is the narrator. So eventually,
Oh,
I probably would love to
well,
listen to it
listen.
again the next go around. But again,
Mm,
book of the Little Acts. We enjoyed reading it.
very
Next
much.
slide. One of the books, Brown Girl, Brownstones, 1959, and it was Paul Marshall,
Marshall.
right? And we had to learn to say the name. We learn, we're researching, we're finding out some things. I wasn't too much of a fan of this book. Sometimes the descriptions were like 3 pages before you found out exactly what she wanted to tell you. And I think that usually just takes me for a loop. But Julie, if you want to talk, did you like this one?
I found it. She had a lot in there. So it's another coming of age story, and it's another second generation child of immigrants struggling against her parents' expectations for her parents' expectations for themselves. And again, published in '59, so it's post World War II as well. And at some point, our lead character, Selena, does in fact find herself involved with a young man that we would now recognize as suffering from PTSD as well, from World War II. I believe World War II, not Korea. This novel does have a lot in it. There's the burgeoning civil rights movement. Does she join into that? Does she not? What does she do when she realizes her mother has sold Dad's property out from underneath him, when Dad's whole goal in life was to return home to this piece of property? It's got a lot to it, especially compared to some of the others that we've read that were shorter and more concise in their writing. But for something from 1959, for this to have been published by a major publisher, is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. And it's certainly a glimpse into an era, also of a changing neighborhood.
And I think that one of the themes that you mentioned, and throughout the novels, we always talked about the feeling of returning home, but, is home from 30, 40, 50 years ago, much different place. Are you able to even go home? So that's a big theme, in a lot of our the Caribbean literature, the books that we've read. So, and then moving over to Queenie, Candace Cardi Williams. Now, some people loved Queenie Jenkins and others did not. Queenie Jenkins is a 20-something-year-old living her best of life in London. Well, sort of. Young people, they live in the best life. As we get older, we'll figure out what we did. But Queenie also has like generational like issues with her grandparents or parents, not knowing her dad. And so there's
in Queenie's case, it's third generation.
Oh, that's true.
She is the grandchild.
Right.
Yeah. And she was raised by her grandparents because her mother was having what we find out to be domestic violence issues. And is still recovering from those. And you start out thinking perhaps you've got yourself a romance going here. And it becomes more than that. Queenie
she's looking for love.
She's looking for love, but she's also the only, or one of the only Black journalists in a high-profile magazine that she works for. So occasionally somebody, comes in and asks her to write that story, and she's feeling some odd pressure from work. And she's looking for romance, having broken up with her long-term white boyfriend, and can't quite get herself set on the right path. And she does have some problems, and she does but I liked Queenie. This is the one Ann Marie snuck in on me and then said, "Oh, by the way, we're reading this in August for book club. You want to join us?" So I had read this one long before we sat down as a book club to read it. And I remember texting Ann Marie when I finished the end of it, and I said, "Well, Queenie's new song is this old song from about 1992 by the Georgia Satellites called 'Don't Hand Me No Lines and Keep Your Hands to Yourself.'"
And she shared it with me. Yes, she did.
And by the end of the book, Queenie has learned what that song means.
Yeah, we could see her. We could see the struggles, you know, in just really trying to find out who is she? Who is Queenie Jenkins? You know,
right.
And so as an aside, yes, Julie has a song for every occasion and maybe every.
Oh no, not every occasion, just some of them. But when I got to Queenie, that "Don't hand me no lines and keep your hands to yourself" just kind of popped right into my head.
And I had to read it just to understand why she sent me that song. So, you know, hey, we're all learning.
You can check that one out. You can Google that one. You can find a YouTube video with it. Georgia Satellites, keep your hands to yourself.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. Oh my. So Saturday, June 12th, we hosted Ingrid Pursued, because I had to remember how to pronounce her name. And she was interviewed by one of our book club members, Cherie A. Woods. And I just don't know where to start with this novel. This was I did confess to her that I stalked her, you know, on Facebook. And I had to send her a message and say, "Hey, we read your book and all of us loved your book." But basically it's like, why did you do that? You know, why did you do that to Mr. Cheatham? You know, and so,
right.
Yeah, the story of Betty, the novel started out like, woo, do I even want to finish reading this? Very disturbing, you know.
And in places it was, you know, this is one of those where Zoom and virtual programming came to our benefit because Ms. Persaud still lives in London.
Yes.
And yet she was able to come to our group and not only stuck around for the panel, you know, for her part of the discussion, but she stuck around afterwards as we discussed some other things. And one of the questions I had for her was, so what was it like narrating your very first book? Because this is a book I listened to, and Ingrid narrated the book herself. And it is unusual for authors to narrate their own books. And the reality, as most of us who listen to audiobooks know, is that most authors should not be allowed anywhere near a microphone. It's hard to do. Just because you can hear them in your head doesn't mean you can make that sound come out of your mouth. And her reading of this book, for me, just added so much to it. I knew the accents were authentic. I knew the voices were authentic because she was reading them. And there is a lot here. It's family, it's community. Family is what you bind yourself to, whether through blood or through friendship, and how that all plays out for Mr. Cheatham, for Betty's son Solo. Just a fantastic book, and a wonderful look at an Asian perspective of being in the Caribbean,
in Trinidad. And for her, and then the book with Love After Love, we just talked about Queenie looking for love, and you know, even Betty coming into who she is as a woman, as a mother, as a friend. And so now this is another one I would love to listen to, but I loved reading it. And you know, one of the things about this novel is the food.
Oh yes, Betty cooks a lot, and it all sounds delicious.
And Mr. Cheatham too.
Mr. Cheatham cooks. It all sounds wonderful.
It's
like Mr. Cheatham. We haven't explained that. Mr. Cheatham starts as one of Betty's lodgers.
Yeah.
he becomes just Betty and Mr. Cheaton and Betty's son Solo become a de facto family. And it is just delightful. I mean, they go through a lot individually and collectively. But I got to say, listening to Ingrid read this one.
Okay. So our audio chipped out a bit.
Yes.
Are you back?
I'm back.
Okay, you chipped out just a little bit, but I think you were just complimenting
yes,
Ingrid on reading.
Wonderful,
you know. So
yeah, it's a wonderful book. I really can't recommend this one too much. It was delightful.
Yep. And the good thing about most of these books, you have them in the Pratt library. I have some behind me on the shelves. You have them online, audio. So, you can always catch up with some of the titles a little bit later on. So let's move over to the next slide. Mr. Walker or Mr. Loverman.
Mr. Loverman, bless his little heart.
We can't give away too much of this story,
though.
Well,
you can give away some of it, but yeah, this one had a bit of a mixed reception in the group as well. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The lead character is, oh Lordy, what is he? 70 or so?
74 years old.
74 years old. The story takes place in
London,
yeah, but it's not modern. It's
no, it's not modern.
70s, maybe 80s. Anyway, yeah, Mr. Loverman, bless his little heart. It's quite the snappy dresser. The cover is pretty accurate.
Yes.
He, in many ways, self-educated. He has taken advantage of the British, what do they call that? That university system where anybody can take classes. Mm-hmm. And he just takes class after class after class after class. Property investment. He sees himself as rather the man about town. Meanwhile, his poor wife is convinced that he's got some woman on the side. He's gotten into it with his daughter. And I just found by the time you got to the end, even though you wanted to strangle him at times, he was doing the best he could in a situation that he didn't know how to handle any other way. Because it turns out that our man here is gay. And of course, coming from the Caribbean as a teenager, he had to hide that. He's hidden it pretty much his entire adult life in London. And it all comes to a reckoning towards the end. And on the one hand, you feel really sorry for his wife. And on the other hand, I certainly felt a little sorry for him as well. But I thoroughly enjoyed this book.
You know me. Mr. Loverman was just not up. Man, we had, we had some really interesting discussion with this man, taking this woman, very religious woman, and the life that he's living with this very religious woman. But in the end, it's about acceptance. It's about growing into yourself. It's about maybe being in a society where you can be yourself, just like we love after love. And again, that's a common theme, is like, who am I? Am I allowed to be my authentic self? Now that we talk about your authentic self, for a Caribbean person in the Caribbean at that time, no. In London, possibly, but still, and Mr. Loverman was quite interesting. And I'll give a shout out to the winner who named their Christmas drinks Mr. Loverman. We did have a little craziness going on in December, where I think that's when we read is that when we read Mr. Loverman?
If it wasn't, it was right after. Somehow it might have to go together as well.
Yeah, it was November. Yeah. And
Right.
yeah, so Star Side of Bird Hill, we can jump a little bit into that. Naomi
Sure.
Jackson, these characters, they returned to Barbados from New York, two sisters, after their mom, I think she had a mental episode. And
Right. As the novel progresses, you
right.
get to understand that mom sent the girls back to, back. The girls have never been there, but back home, which is another recurring theme, going back home when you've never actually been home. It turns out this one addresses tangentially mental illness and its effect on family, especially family separated by international boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, I mean, we won't go too much into that, but I think that one of the things you pointed out, Julie, in some of your notes, you were talking about Naomi Jackson and that she went to school, I think, in South Africa, for a degree or something. But most of the books that we're talking about, they're award-winning books. Most of the writers are like, oh my gosh, you will want to read their other works. And so it's just a reminder that it is Caribbean literature, but we are all over the world. We are open to all different types of members to join us because we talked about the universality of like themes about moms, parents, leaving your home, going off, growing up, and all of what life has to throw our way. We can see it all in these novels. Looking for love, respecting the ways of the old and trying to get the old to respect the ways of the new. And so, that's a big thing throughout the novels also. Yeah, so let's jump to the next slide. It is like 37 minutes in. Julie loves to listen to these, and I think you listen to Afterlife also.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
I listened to Afterlife. That was narrated by Alma Cuervo. This one, somehow, when we got to the discussion, I think I was the only one that listened to this one. And I had a very different response from everyone who read it. Folks who read it, I think, got caught up in the poetry in it, which is, Julia Alvarez is Dominican. Her lead character in this story is got to have some sort of personal autobiographical input to it because she is a professor in Vermont, as is Julia Alvarez, and also in their 60s. So that there's certainly some parallels there. But she writes poetry in the Spanish style, so it looks different on the page. She also kind of narrates to herself, pulling references to world literature out as she goes. And I think reading this on the page must have been much harder than listening to it, because I found the story very easy to listen to and to follow. And in the discussion we had, folks who read it seemed to have had more trouble following the storyline than I did. So I can highly recommend listening to this one.
There were a lot of us who had to confess that they could not finish it. I was included. But after the discussion, it's something about needing to finish a book, even if you have to struggle through it. So, but I went back and I finished it because it also had heavy topics. Topics of sister and everything, and we won't get into spoilers, but it's like family.
This is
family.
This is one of the few, almost exclusively with older. Second generation issues. So, these sisters, their parents have passed away. The sisters are looking after themselves. They've scattered across the country.
Right.
And one sister has a crisis, and that the others must band together to try and figure out how to help their sister with this crisis. And at the same time, our lead is going through her own crisis. She is recently widowed. She's discovered that the next door neighbor has some workers undocumented in the United States who suddenly come over and need her help. And she's successfully not been a party to that up to this point in her life. And now suddenly she's got a sister in crisis. She herself is widowed. And now she's got this young immigrant worker looking at her going, pero yo necesito tu ayuda. And she's going, no, you don't. No. I'm sure we can work this out without me getting involved at all. And no, sometimes you get sucked into things because that's where you are and you can help. And I really enjoyed it. But again, I think this is one that perhaps format may matter more than content. And the audiobook I found really good.
Okay. And as you heard, Julie speaks Spanish.
Sometimes.
So, we did talk about the fact that most of this, the literature we were reading were like Anglo-Caribbean, because not many native like French speakers or even Spanish speakers are, in our group. Julie is an exception.
No, Julie was a Spanish major in college. There's a difference.
Well, she's an exception. She could at least read some of the Spanish. So we have fun with that. Then we move over to 1 Year of Ugly. And everyone, basically, I don't know, by Carolyn Mackenzie. And for the most part, when people think of the title, they're like, 1 Year of Ugly. Like, what is ugly? Like, it's just ugly things happening. What is going on? But I won't spoil it for you because you will find out what is, or maybe who
very quickly. Who is.
But the thing with this one we're talking about is that the characters are leaving Venezuela to go to Trinidad, but they're going as illegals. And so, right, we were talking about how most people believe that when you leave the islands, you're going to Canada, the US, London, but you're not going to another island, or you're not seeking another way of life in another island. And we have a lot of that going on in the Caribbean and elsewhere. So that's like the gist of it. Carolyn Mackenzie is a hoot. I mean, can be raw. Language can be raw in so many ways, but it is hilarious.
Oh yeah. This is another one that I listened to. This one was narrated by Inés del Castillo. And she did a really good job with the voices because this family has got young, old, male, female, and she had to do not just the Venezuelan accent of the main cast of characters, but there are, of course, various Trini characters throughout this thing. She's got her hands full in narrating this one and does do a fantastic job. One of the things I commented on when we were reading this is the first time we've read a book where the Caribbean island is the recipient of immigration rather than the producer of immigrants, as it were. This is the first book we've read where we're reading about the immigrant experience to the Caribbean. And of course, these Venezuelans have immigrated because of the chaos in Venezuela. Currently, this is a very recent book. It's a year and a half old. It does go a little over the top. And there's, of course, a cute little romance in there, too. But she touches on some important topics, important to the world, important to families. But it's a great listen, and it is deliberately a humorous take on what can be a very serious situation.
Very much so. And let's go to the next slide. So one of the things that we're going to run through this a little bit, just in case there's anyone with questions or comments. So we did not read a full novel for the April, And so we decided to look into Caribbean poets. And we came up with quite a few poets that basically almost none of us, we did not know about. And so the names are listed, and, we know about Louise Bennett. And then we also heard from some of our resident poets, Sharia Moore, and Joelle also read her poem Disillusioned, and this was actually a really, really good break from the novels.
It was.
Yeah, we had to find out a little bit about the poet, and then pick a selection or two, and then shared it with the group. Some people shared an audio, some people actually recited it in a way with the accents. So it was really a good program, a good way of looking at some of the works of these authors and sometimes poets. So, all right, next slide. Future discussions. We are getting ready to discuss Floating in a Most Peculiar Way by Louis Chude Soki or Sokai, July 28th at 6:30. And this is an interesting novel in that we are looking at a Nigerian born to a Jamaican mother and a Nigerian father, and from the country of Biafra, and the Nigerian Civil War, and how he ended up in Jamaica. And it's nonfiction, so it's a memoir, and we're looking forward to discussing it. Let's just say that.
I started it.
Okay, right. And so, there's a song in there, Julie. I know you're going
All right.
Okay. And then we're going to, the next book is Barbados, How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House. Is it Barbados or Bahamas? Woo, brain went out the window. There's a lot to remember, but just know that we are continuing to read Caribbean literature, Caribbean authors in the diaspora, all over. We're game for it. The next slide, and then we head to Cuba with Gabriel Garcia of Women and Salt. And the October book is Kai Miller's The Last Mourner Woman. We're heading back to Jamaica. And yes, they did tell me I couldn't select all Jamaican authors. So we move around. And next slide, we're just running through some of these. Part of the presentation that we do is we always pick out the country, some of the national dishes, the national dish. And so we'll talk about, people have had them, they make them. Sometimes we even look up recipe. There's sometimes drinks. And so it's a way of making the Caribbean come alive for us, and one day, hopefully we'll get to meet in person and enjoy some of these foods. Next slide. November, December, we really do not have a title selected yet, but it's coming. And then later on, we are going to say, Julie J., you want to read that, or I'd read that?
Oh, I don't care. But let me jump in here for those of you that haven't been able to join us in a book group. Ann Marie hosts them. I just show up having read the book and then talk. But Ann Marie does a lot of prep work. And so she has those slides were from presentations she's given us. So for every country that we visit, or every little Jamaica or neighborhood that we visit, Ann Marie pulls together, this is where it is in the world, this is a map, this is a flag, this is the national dish, this is the economy, all of those kinds of things that help us put the book into a little different context than we might have without that. And so if you care to join us, this is a book club that does actually talk about the books. We've done a very good job of staying on topic. Even as we have our own adult beverages as we sit at home. But we do stay on topic. I do hope one day that we can get together and try some of these recipes and some of these foods out, especially for folks like me that are not as familiar with some of them as fried plantains I'm used to, but some of the other dishes I'd never heard of or had never tried, even if I was familiar with the ingredients. So please do join us. We'd love to have folks join us. And even if you can't join us, if you have titles to recommend that we might like, feel free to contact either Ann Marie at Clifton or me at Roland Park, and because we're always looking for new titles.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. So again, on behalf of the Enoch Pratt Free Library, we want to thank you for joining us today and to remind you that you can visit prattlibrary.org for more virtual and or hybrid programming events. And please do not forget to join Summer Break Baltimore. You can join online or in person. And Julie is wearing her beautiful t-shirt.
Summer Break Baltimore. Make sure you sign up.
Yeah. So, and again, I don't know if we have any questions, any comments. And at this
point, it
point,
looks like Curdell and Sherry both joined us. I'm so pleased to see their comments. I hope somebody else, some of our others, were perhaps able to either join us now or will watch the presentation later. These will be, as many Pratt presentations are, posted onto Pratt's Facebook page. Mm-hmm. And so if you missed part of us, you can certainly catch everything there. And there are other presentations there as well. Ann Marie and I have both done other programs, plus all of Pratt's programs. There's, I hate to say, but there's got to be at least 50 or 60 recorded programs on Pratt's Facebook video library. So just go to Facebook, look up Pratt Library, and find our video library. There's some great other programs recorded there for you to see.
And on YouTube.
Right.
Right. And so, thank you for the comments. Cherie Woods, that you like the books you bring inside, look at the lives of Caribbean people, both at home and overseas. Miss Curdell, Mr. Loverman was also a great story. I so love the Caribbean Book Club. We are surely enjoying some of the best Caribbean writers. And we definitely want to thank you for joining us. I don't know if there's anything that we did not cover. Did we not cover everything?
I think we at least managed all of our books and our poetry. I hope folks find something enjoyable to read.
Yeah, so we hope that you will join us. And again, check out the books online, check out the books, get to your local library, because you can come into the library, and check out your books. So, hey, Sophia.
Hi, I wanted to say you guys covered everything, and there's so many books, there's so many things I can read now. Like, I don't already have a to-be-read pile at home, so thank you. But yeah, thank you, our wonderful audience, for joining us today. We also hope that you have now an even larger to-be-read pile than you did when you joined us. And thank you to our wonderful Ann Marie and Julie for discussing your picks. And, if you liked or disliked it, that's always important. I love all the books we read. And yes, for those watching, if you haven't already signed up for Summer Break Baltimore, please do so either online or in person. Go to prattlibrary.org and you'll be able to find out more about the program from there. And with that, we're going to sign off for today. So thank you for joining us, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.